Hello, this is a new video in the English language. I'm here at a very special place in the Borstai in Munich, which is something most people don't know, and tourists coming to Munich will almost definitely not get to know it. But this is just accidental. So I would like to speak today about one of the core subjects of musical education today, which is what is tonality and what is atonality. So we have a lot of conventional stuff about this. So tonality normally is considered the major minor tonality as it has established itself in the course of the development of European polyphony, when composers started to seriously modulate through all the keys. Then, with all this modulation, the multitude of different scales was eliminated. Why don't we have Phrygian anymore in normal tonal music? Why don't we have normally Lydian or Dorian mode? What is the reason? Why do we have only the major mode, which is identical with the ionic mode, and the minor mode, which is identical with none of the modes? So, what was needed when modulation was established? And this mainly happened in the time of late Baroque, in Bach's time, and then even more so in the classical music, when there came the idea of changing the sentiment inside a piece, changing the effect, as we call it. So that means going from first theme to second theme, changing the whole character, as it happened in the early symphonic music. It started with Giovanni Battista Sammartini and the Mannheim School, but it became fully developed in the music of Haydn and Mozart, and then it became the major thing in Beethoven's music and in Schubert and so on. So therefore, to establish a new key, a much more clear arrival that this is where we go, a teleological way to approach the new key was needed, and this was only given by the clarity and directiveness of major or minor mode. So Dorian mode stayed always somewhere between, so you can arrive at the basic tone or you can arrive at something else, and it's very easy to leave it. And same with Lydian mode to some degree. And Phrygian mode, it was unqualified for polyphonic music from the beginning, because on the fifth, on the dominant, you cannot build a normal chord. Actually, Phrygian mode combined with a dominant in major mode, which it needs a major mode chord, because it has to have the extrovert aspect and to lead to the basic note of the tonic. So combination of Phrygian and this major mode chord on the dominant is what we call today the minor mode. So Phrygian stayed there, but Phrygian was not anymore Phrygian. And so we have these two modes which constituted the major minor tonality, the fundament of music from, let's say, late Baroque to early 20th century. But then many things came up. So it was a development with all these modal modes and this idea of having more subdominant influence, and so we have these composers who are more interested in the subdominant region, like Brahms, like Fauré, like Sibelius. And so it opened up to so-called modal tonality, mainly done with the Impressionists in France, and so on. And of course with a lot of folklore coming in. But this basically is also tonal music. So it is still orientated with a basic tone, and everything is harmonically related. And same thing happened when the modernism came in its first waves and took us away from this consonance as a basic principle, so much more dissonance is unsolved, and the music of expressionism. Expressionism particularly in German and Austrian music. So it's the Vienna School, Braun Schönberg and Early Webern, Early Schönberg and Alban Berg. And of course these composers from Berlin, like Heinz Thiessen, like Max Butting, and others who lived there, like Philipp Jarnach, Eduard Erdmann, and many more, they went beyond what was normal tonality, but still it is tonality, it is free tonality. So that is still, everything is related. So when you start and when you end, there's a relation from the start to the end, a correlation. Atonality means that this correlation doesn't exist anymore to be experienced. That means, of course, a composer of a 12-note piece knows that he writes all the 12 notes, and this is what he will call a correlation. But it's not a correlation in your experience. A normal listener cannot judge at all whether all the 12 tones were there or not. And also the law of having only then a note repeated when all the others were there is something which can only make sense if the music is without many voices. There's just one voice. Then, of course, in this one voice, the note reappears after all the others have appeared. But if you have polyphony, the note reappears already in the second or third chord in another voice. So it's not true that we have this law there, but we have this kind of vague situation. So all the 12 notes appear with same rights, and none of them is anymore the center. And so I would call this atonality of the second order. That means it becomes atonal because it becomes too complicated for us to still correlate everything. So we can control it to some degree. We can hear whether they are the right notes. We can hear whether the pitch is right. If the dissonance is more, we are less sensitive for the pitch, definitely. So we are really sensitive for pitch if it's really consonant. The more dissonant it is, the more unclear pitch becomes. But still, to some degree, we can control that. So we can control every note, but we don't have a harmonic correlation anymore. This is atonality of the second order, but still there is always tonality, because we have always fifth relations and other intervals, fourth of course, which give us a tonal feeling. So tonality of the first order would be if we have a scale where no fifth is included. Why is that the case? We can look through all the tone systems. When does it become really atonal? When we have no clear fifth relation anymore. So the fifth is needed to give a chord stability, and it is needed to give orientation. Then some people said, okay, but thirds also work. Minor thirds, major thirds. That's not true, because if we take a chord only of minor thirds, there is no center. And if we take a chord only of major thirds or the whole tone scale, there is no center. But if we have fifths there, we have a center. And that also makes something else clear. The idea of symmetry is basically an atonal idea. It's a fantastic idea because all the symmetry makes everything the same, right? That means no hierarchy, but also it creates non-correlation. And correlation always has to do with non-symmetrical relations. So just like the fifth is, the fifth and the fourth make the octave. But if you would go with the tritone, which would be symmetrical, there is no clear orientation. Because the tritone is distant, same distance in both fifth directions. So it is without any gravity. So, but in the fifth relation, we always have gravity. We always have a center, and the rest is related to this center. And then the center can change, so that's called modulation. So that is also the case that in 12-tone music, we have no modulation anymore. Not only that, we have no harmonic distances anymore. Because from the beginning, we are everywhere. We make all the distances within the first 12 notes. And we repeat that always. So we cannot expand at all because we are already everywhere. So this main thing in classical music, which creates form, basically, and large form, of course, is totally neutralized. Because we cannot go anywhere because we are everywhere. And so dodecaphony results naturally in very condensed and small forms of high complexity, like in the music of Anton Webern. And this is very, very difficult to perform in an adequate manner, which we can understand because Webern, he wrote maybe one piece per year, and this piece will be average 7 minutes, all the movements together, or something like that. And so he has 1 year or more to compose such a little amount of music, such little duration, all in all. So he will be like a scientist with a microscope, and he will go into every corner of the music, and he will absolutely explore everything about these relations in a very, very small circle of movement. And therefore, he finally knew what he wrote. But then for the performer, that means that he has to do the same research. It may not take as long time as for the composer, but it may take him 2 or 3 months to be the master of the piece. For an ensemble, impossible. For an orchestra, absolutely impossible. So we know that we never hear Webern, real Webern, in the orchestra. And for example, the Aesthetics of Boulez, which was a kind of gunshot Webern, not sensitive to the intervals, atonal idea of Webern. Webern is not atonal, but Webern is tonal in the most advanced and complex degree, always on the border of atonality. So basically you can say atonality is when there are no relations at work, which depends on first order. The scale doesn't include fifth relations. That means it has nothing to do with our 12-tone scale. It might be the whole tone scale is atonal, for example. So a long piece is not possible. The minor third scale is atonal, the major third scale is atonal, and then there can be something like a little bit smaller than the whole tone, somewhere in between, and we don't hear any fifths, and this, which would be totally artificial and nobody could produce it without the help of a computer, would still be atonal. But we did some experiments with it, and we are so easily even hearing a totally out of tune fifth as a fifth, which is also the case in 12th tone, well-tempered tuning. The fifth is always too small. So it is very difficult to get a scale with many notes, which is atonal. And the scale normally contains half tones and whole tones in polyphonic music. Not in the music that was there before with polyphony. It was much more micro intervals, but they went lost when polyphony came, because polyphony created this idea of the chord and its resonance, its consonance, and it was not anymore possible to include all these micro intervals and they wouldn't sound wrong. So something expanded and became more complex, which was polyphony. Something became less complex, micropolyphony. Was reduced to 7 notes and then maximum 12 notes. And 12 notes which are all wrong, but our latitude, our possibility, our ability to make square things round or round things square made it possible that with the well-tempered tuning we still hear intervals that work and that function even if they are not totally in tune. So coming back to the atonality, first order is scales not including any fifth relation. Atonality, second order, is music too complex to be experienced in correlation. Atonality, third order, is all the music that is not performed in a manner that it's held together. That means also a Mozart symphony that is not performed in a way that we can correlate beginning to the end. And that doesn't mean that we hear it from because we know the piece and we know what comes after what. This is just the control. But the experience of really that it belongs together in that way, in the most spontaneous manner, as if it were the first time, this is something else than coming from memory. And so I call everything that is not a sufficient performance that holds the piece together as an organic whole, atonality of the third order. So tonality is only if this correlation is there. If we really hear a music which is totally bound together in the most spontaneous and living way. So that's for today, and I hope this can help you to get some clarity, and I am very happy if there are some questions, constructive or skeptical or whatever. And some people say that music has nothing to do with theory. That's right, it has nothing to do with theory, but theory can help us to become clear and to exclude what is non-musical. So enjoy your day and wishing you all the best.